Chapter 9. Before the Earth Was Round. I'd been a working professional since I'd finished college and escaped the drudgery that accompanies so many service-level jobs that include, but are not limited to, delivery driver, bicycle messenger, line cook, and a half a dozen others that kept my head above water, and just far enough ahead of my creditors to live in relative peace. Having said that, when I graduated from the ranks of the blue-collar Joe and got myself fancy stuff like a big desk with my nameplate on it, and then spent more time in meetings than at said desk, I got used to enjoying the perks of luncheons and business breakfasts. After all, one must adapt if one is to survive. But in all that time, a lunch meeting was always rather bland, and in only rare cases did I feel like I'd gained anything other than a laundry list of things to do to have other meetings about. Good point. I'm an artist, true, and I've always considered that to be my profession and likely will continue to do so until I die. But I may have been slightly less than forthcoming about what my job at Finite Eternity entailed. I worked as the senior art director, and that sounds pretty high-end, right? Well, and it should, because with any project the studio produced, it was my job to give it the final once-over and ensure that it met with the standards and ideas laid out in the initial production planning. The hitch was, because I was a director, I had the final authority to say what went and what didn't. This had the unique ability to make me both a lot of friends and an equal amount of opponents. I myself contributed artistically on a small level. Usually I'd hand the art team a few sketches or diagrams and then they'd build from there. In a way, all the products that the studio delivered had some of me in them. I did miss having my name under the titles of principal artist, inks and paint, colorist, digital background designer, or 3D modeler, but I served my time in the trenches, and it's not something I would give up fingers to return to. The meeting the team the Pantheon had selected for me was a lot like initial staff meetings we would have at Finite Eternity. Granted, the food probably cost more than my old boss's rent and was likely to be from the four corners of the globe and contained something obscenely decadent like dodo omelets. Granted, the dodo was pretty unlikely to make an appearance, I hoped. Yvette and I took the elevator up to the floor where I had met Lou, and he laid out the initial premise that drove Pantheon to whatever goal, if any, it was pursuing. We walked through the same hallways and then out onto the terrace where Lou had poured me that unbelievable glass of divine scotch. It was cool outside, but not so much that it would require a jacket or additional layers. The black polished basalt was warm in the noon sun, and a canopy of interleaved canvas panels gave the balcony a dappled light that was somewhat more natural feeling than I'd have thought possible for a tall building in the center of a major city. The bar was being attended to by a young man in a typical button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he was chatting with a small Asian man I didn't recognize. In the center of the balcony, a ring of low chairs surrounded a wooden slab table big enough to hold a small buffet table of kebabs, cheeses, and, to my surprise, small plates stacked with bite-sized crab cakes. It was an odd mishmash of culinary styles. I didn't like it. Cheese is meant to be served with wine, crackers, or fondue, not kebabs, and where do the crab cakes fit in? My stomach, however, was less understanding of my long-standing issues with mixing styles, and gurgled noisily. If Yvette noticed, she didn't say anything. Bless her. There were about a half a dozen people around the balcony, most in pairs talking to each other in other reserved tones. I stopped alongside the far end of the bar and put my hand on the finely polished surface, feeling to make sure the world wasn't going to start spinning uncontrollably again. I noticed Lou sitting in one of the chairs near the table, sat next to Bryn, talking to a tall blonde fellow who wore an overly styled charcoal suit with a chocolate-colored tie. Lou's eyes met mine, and he smiled broadly, stood up, and walked over to me. "How's the workspace looking? I heard you good things from Elle." He began, placing a hand on my shoulder, guiding me to the ring of chairs around the table. "We've had that space ready for some time, but I was very excited to see what you would do with it. I'll come by later to take a look, if that's all right." Sure, I can't think of a reason why not," I answered, feeling a little awkward. It was going to take a long time for me to get used to people talking about things I was dealing with that frankly strained credibility, like baubles found in a toy store. He smiled and patted me on the shoulder again and took a seat. As I did the same, he called out, "Let's get started, everyone." Everyone took their seats around the table, save for Yvette, who sat down on a bar stool with a glass of white wine. I watched as each took a small plate of finger foods and sat back in the chairs, paying me no more mind than anyone else. After eyeing the crab cakes long enough, I took a small pile on my plate and leaned back in my chair, munching on one. Holy crap, I can't be sure, but I'm fairly certain someone had to have sold their soul in order for those little bite-sized miracles to taste that good. Lou, chewing noticeably, took his phone out of his jacket and set it on the armrest of his chair and swallowed his food before setting his plate on the opposite arm. Hey everyone, this is your project lead, Von Buren. Let's get the introductions out of the way so we can get down to it, Lou said. To my right, the Asian man I saw talking to the bartender set his plate aside and extended a small weathered hand. His eyes were lined and his face showed creases and wrinkles of an elderly but no less hale gentleman. He was small, but his posture and attitude showed that he'd lived a life where he'd earned every ounce of the respect he was given. His Asian accent was curt and mostly breath, but somehow I understood exactly what he said. Mr. Buren, my name is Fei Lo. I look forward to working with you. I shook his hand and found his grip to be almost disturbingly firm. Hi, what's your area of expertise, Fei? He smiled back. Music, sir. I was a concert violinist and pianist for 40 years before I left Hong Kong. I hadn't done anything for 40 years, including live. Well, I look forward to seeing what we can do. I wasn't too sure what to say. I had about as much in common with a concert violinist as Katie has in common with a horse-drawn carriage. To Fei's left was a rather rough-looking man in his early 40s, brown hair and gray at the temples. He was white, but his skin had become so battered by the sun that it was practically bronze. Sporting a salt and pepper mustache, he wore a blue t-shirt with a tan leather blazer open over it and well-worn blue jeans with a pair of very broken-in work boots. He looked like the foreman on a construction site. His eyes were pale blue, maybe a shade or two lighter than my own, and he had a light scar along one side of his cleft chin. He noisily chomped down on a kebab and almost spoke with his mouth full, but Lou saved him from the impropriety. That is Bruce Colton Masters, our resident metallurgist. He's been with us for some time now. He swallowed and interrupted in a Texas accent that was just thick enough to enjoy, but not so much that it sounded country. Call me Bullet. Only my mother ever calls me Bruce. I laughed, taking a liking to the guy right then. Nice to meet you, Bullet. Brent sat on the other side of Lou, who sat on my right, and rolled her eyes. Smashing. He's making friends. Pray we're all so lucky. I really had hoped vainly that she would call off her ducks just for a little while. Alas, there's my hopeless optimism for you. I decided to play it cool and see if she would dig herself into a hole. Yes, Bryn, I see you there. You couldn't stay away, could you? I have other things to do besides waste time on you, she spat, folding her arms. Lou sat between us, grinning like a dad listening to his kids bicker. I don't know why, but that bugged me more than anything Bryn would say during that meeting. Time is never wasted, the blonde guy that Lou had talking to before meeting interrupted with some odd accent from Norway or something. He then fixed me with his oddly green eyes. It just gets abused by argumentative pedestrians. Oh, great. Another person to throw out the verbal abuse. I pointed at him. And you would be... He took a cigarette from a case in his pocket and made a dramatic show of lighting it, taking a long drag before exhaling in a derisive manner. He had his legs crossed above the knee and his pant leg was pulled up just enough to reveal overly colored socks. His hair had been meticulously styled, practically oozing styling gel. He had a neatly trimmed mustache on his lip and a goatee to match. He held a cigarette hand with a very loose wrist, eyeballing me like a judge at a dog show. When he spoke, his accent seemed intentionally snooty. I am Uli, and you are very interesting. Lou leaned over to me and whispered, He's harmless, just a little, you know. Uli must have heard him because he interrupted, raising an eyebrow. No, Lou, I am a lot. You know this. Oh, I knew what he meant. Yeah, that's exactly what he meant. Well, what do you expect me to say? I lived in California, where you can't hardly throw a Gucci shoe in the air without hitting one and have him tell you it's out of season. I don't have a problem with him. Do you? Just grow up. Okay, all people can be handled on a case-by-case basis. I carry no reservations about anyone, except the British. Lately, the British have really been pissing me off. I patted the back of Lou's hand. Thanks for the heads up. I never could have figured that out. Lou snorted a small laugh and sat back in his chair. Uli is our designer. He worked in fashion and furniture houses all over Sweden, Germany, Austria. That was impressive. I took another bite of crab cake and asked him, anything I might have seen? Uli took another dramatic drag on his smoke. Have you seen the bathrooms near Guggenheim? That's in Bilbao, Spain. He sighed. I know where it is. I'd be more surprised if you knew that those shoes and that shirt are fashion crime. I looked down at my black and white bowling shirt and red Chuck Taylors. It was a vintage look. What was his problem? Oh, right. Okay. No, Uli, I haven't seen the bathrooms in the Guggenheim, I confessed. Good, because the only work I've done there was the result of too much gelato and not enough fiber. My designs are not work, they are art, he said without looking at anyone in particular. I can't say I didn't at least admire the sheer snarkiness of his answer. I nodded and took another bite of food. I was about to turn to Yvette to see if she could get me a beverage, but she handed me a cold can of... How did she know? This girl was amazing. I'm going to take us off track for a second here, so just bear with me. There have been numerous contributions to the beverage and food Goliath of the 20th century, and while many of them are clever plays on existing products, a few more original than and are meant to be savored and enjoyed. The ability to buy cans of frosting right off the shelf and then spread it on chocolate chip cookies, for example. Orange juice without pulp for another. But as far as beverages is concerned, for Von Buren there is only one soda that will ever suffice. Ever. I tried to quit it, but I couldn't cope. And that was just too much history, too much love. And that beverage is the underrated, except no substitutes, cream soda. Since I was a boy, nothing has ever come close. And I don't expect you to understand because I can tell you prefer something more mainstream like Coke or, God forbid, Pepsi or their transparent doppelgangers like Sprite or 7-Up. Not for me, though. Those are sellouts. Cream soda is one of the few flavors that has to retain its quality because it isn't making mountains of cash and has to be true to the fans. When Yvette handed me that can, it felt like being reunited with an old friend. I popped the top and savored the subtle flavor in 2 long, slow gulps. Where was I? Right. Uli and his unique brand of directness. The Swede had said one more thing to me. Should you feel the need to redecorate your citadel, you set up downstairs with something a little less megalomaniacal and a little more tasteful. I'll be waiting. I arched an eyebrow. I'll keep that in mind. Which left only one person around the table who hadn't said a word the whole time. A rather slight young girl, and when I say girl, I mean girl. She couldn't have been more than 15. She sat in the chair with her chicken legs curled up under her, and she picked at her food sparingly and wore a faded blue sweater and black jeans. She had art house glasses, which were strangely like my own, and her auburn hair was loose, but showed no real attempt to straighten it or style it in any way. Her eyes were wide apart, and although I couldn't tell what color they were because she wouldn't look me directly in the eye, I suppose she could have been classified as pretty. Given her deliberate obliviousness to fashion or presentation, it was somewhat refreshing to see that not all the women employed by Pantheon spent copious time, money, and energy attempting to look like fashion models, movie stars, or in Brent's case, the most expensive call girl ever to grace London. Rachel, Lou said, aren't you going to introduce yourself? The girl nodded slightly and put her feet on the floor and then issued, Hello, Mr. Buren. It's nice to finally meet you. She had no accent, and I don't mean that she didn't have an accent to me. She had no accent. Her English was so perfect, it sounded so precise, it was a little like watching someone write by hand and producing Times New Roman as though printed by a computer. It was really freaking weird. What do you do, Rachel? Lou answered for her. Poetry, Vaughn. Rachel is an up-and-coming prodigy. Among other things, Bryn mumbled. That's enough, Bryn, Lou snapped, probably the first genuine outburst I'd seen him make. It wasn't overtly harsh or loud, but it was clear. Bryn was out of line. Bryn didn't say anything else. She just sat back and sipped from a glass filled with something red. Blood of the innocent, most likely. Rachel and Bullet are chiefly responsible for getting the lithoharmony prepared for you downstairs, Lou explained. How did you? I can't even begin to explain what I think of it. It's amazing, I answered. I looked over to Bullet. You guys built that? He smiled broadly. Yeah, that's right. That thing was here before Rachel was even born. We just sort of woke it up. I felt my head cocked quizzically. Must have looked rather funny. Woke it up? Well, not like it's alive, Bullet assured. Just a turn of phrase around here. I see. I didn't. I mean, not even a little. Well, now that we are introduced, Lou beamed, let's get down to it. I thought you'd never get there, Uli snorted. Bryn laughed. Lou ignored them. He set his plate back on the table and tented his fingers as he leaned back in his chair and propped one ankle over the other. Vaughn, you and this team represent a cross-section of valuable and indefinable expertise from around the world. Each of you has gifts and viewpoints built from a lifetime of differing values and ideas. Not one of you has ever been a factor in the other during the most formative years of your life. In a way, you all are about as different from each other as a group of people can be, he started. I took a sip of cream soda, feeling the smooth, sweet liquid slide down my throat. How did a vet know it was exactly what I wanted? Lou continued. The lithoharmony is one of several projects we've taken into our care. Some of you, Bullet, Rachel, Rin, you've been with us for a while. Faye, Uli, you two have been constructed by us before but never brought in for direct access to our work, and we're glad to have you. Vaughn, you're the wild card here. You have next to no knowledge of our capabilities. I raised my drink and espoused, yeah, thanks for that, by the way. I think you drugged away the first half of my art school with that. Bullet chuckled. Rachel smiled lightly. Lou lost none of his momentum. A necessary step, Vaughn. It will be worth it in time. You'll see. Can that time be now? Because all this dancing around the truth is giving me a mad case of motion sickness, I replied. Lou's expression shifted just slightly. He lost a little of the twinkle. I think he was used to be given a certain amount of leeway for the theatrical, and my candor put him on the back foot. He sat forward slightly and took a breath. He looked at his phone sitting on the armrest next to him. He snatched it up and in one motion tossed it to me. I caught it, but almost spilled soda on myself. Smooth, I know. He pointed at the phone in a deliberately dramatic fashion. Tell me who made that? I eyeballed the phone, turning it over in my hand, looking for a manufacturer's label. After a few seconds, I gave up. In a cheesy, dramatastic voice, he said, The Dark Lord Sauron, when he grew tired of Verizon charging him minutes for roaming in Mordor. One phone to rule them all. Lou gained a bit of whatever sparkle I had tarnished off him a moment ago. We do, here at Pantheon. That one you're holding was the first crafted when you were still in diapers. I want to call your bullshit, but I get the sense it would be lost on you. Trust that impulse, Bryn quipped. Bite me, I spat. In the jugular, she hissed. Knock it off, you two, Lou growled. It is rather entertaining, Lou, Uli announced. Just the same, enough, Lou said, after taking a breath to regain his composure. He pointed again at the phone. That phone was never given any modifications, and yet, as you can see, it can use the internet faster than any phone being built today. It requires no battery and has no moving parts. How do you explain that, Vaughn? How indeed. I was a fair fan of most comic books and science fiction, but the situation I was in really didn't belong in either arena. I studied the phone closely again. The pearlescent white, semi-clear body of the phone was not helping me figure it out. You can't, Lou informed me. In the logical mind, there is no explanation as to why that phone should work, much less how it does. That is the point, ultimately. When I was young, I used to look at people doing long division and feel like they were seeing colors on the spectrum that I couldn't. It was frustrating to the utmost because complex math is as close to a nemesis as I'm ever likely to find. But what Lou was telling me, in the most literal sense, made no sense at all. At all. I kept looking at the phone with my brain feeling like it was seeing only 2 dimensions when clearly there should be 3. Lou, you gotta give me more than that, I pleaded. Bullet interrupted. Try this. When you're a kid and a stick becomes a sword, a treehouse a fortress, you're always fast enough to dodge bullets and strong enough to fight monsters, and you're never scared of anything because you believe those things. It was weird how much more sense that made. So the phone works because we believe it does? Lou smiled at Bullet and then looked at me. It's a very basic way to explain it, but yes. And this has what to do with me and, by extension, us, I asked. Smash it, Lou told me. What? Smash the phone, he explained. Oh, what the hell. Might as well. I leaned forward and overarmed the phone into the floor between my feet. The glass casing practically exploded, leaving tiny fragments along the floor in every direction for 3 feet. Laying in the center of the blast zone were 3 coiled ribbons of metal, one of copper, one of what looked like silver, and one that sparkled like diamond. The 3 of them were coiled together like a helix and lay on the floor in a tangle about 6 inches long. Given the size of the phone, they must have been spun tightly inside the casing. Lou reached down and pulled the copper ribbon free. It was half as wide as the little message inside a fortune cookie, but it must have been 2 feet long or so when pulled straight. He leaned over his armrest and laid the ribbon on the arm of my chair. Look. I did as he told me. I studied the little thing. It was beautiful. laid with nearly invisible engraving of glyphs and pictographs, and hovering among the lines and spirals were ever so subtle words from more languages than I can identify. From but English I recognized hear, tell, speak, translate, know, and a few others. It gave me goosebumps. As for the reasoning in said goosebumps, who knows, but I was fast running out of explanations for anything. And how are we going to use this kind of thing, was the only question I could muster. That one is up to you, Lou explained. The resources of Pantheon are at your disposal, and I'm sure you've gathered that they are by no means limited. The goal is to provide the world with something that will benefit them. A simple goal. Yeah, and the Death Star was just a simple model kit, I said on reflex. It was a simple model kit, built from other model kits, Uli remarked. Thank you, Mr. No Imagination, I quipped. And that's it? I asked. Lou directly, just give the world something of benefit. That's the big plan. That's the huge abduction-powered tranquilizer-spewing hot tamale of a plan. Yes, he answered, smiling. This was getting more absurd by the minute. There had to be a better, more grandiose or devious or greedy or any number of other motivations for all of this. There had to be. Good for the sake of good is an illusion given strength by such institutions as Christmas and Thanksgiving. It isn't real. Good for the sake of good is the result of guilt. People who have feel bad for the have-nots and make up the difference. There's nothing else. There's no great white good or no deep dark evil. That's all just objects colliding in space, and that's all there will ever be. I may be jaded, I may be sarcastic and self-absorbed, but I know that doing something for someone else is never honestly selfless. You feel great when you help out someone else, and so you help others to feel that way. People become junkies on that feeling, sure as any heroin addict. The difference is that they don't know it. They're too busy trying to get their next fix of generosity and kindness feedback. So maybe it's not so different. Don't give me that look. Yeah, that look. Like I'm just another narcissistic, amoral middle grounder. Seriously, Lou? That's the plan? Do good? There's got to be more to it. I mean, what's your angle? I pressed. He's serious, Faye said. You're damn right I'm serious. I've half a mind to... No, Faye added, pointing to Lou. He's serious. Maybe it was that I was raised to listen to your elders, or maybe it was because Faye powered his statement with just enough Mr. Miyagi to get his point across with oodles more poignancy than would otherwise be possible. But I believed him. I really did. Thank you, Faye, Lou said. Faye tipped his head forward in a slight bow. I looked at the smashed pieces of the phone on the balcony floor, sparkling in the sunlight, and then at the ribbon of copper. Just give me the afternoon to think about what to do with that, and I'll give you my thoughts tomorrow. Certainly. If you need anything from your team, just ask, Lou said, standing up and straightening his pleats. I just sat there and watched everyone go. Then I took a deep breath and slouched in the chair and let my head rest against the back with my eyes closed. What was I getting into? I opened my eyes and nearly jumped out of my chair when I saw Bullet's impressive frame standing over me. What the hell? I get the sense you need some guidance, Vaughn, he announced. My heart rate slowed to a reasonable level. What gave it away, I asked, standing up out of the chair and finding myself only eye level with his chin. Well, I could hear the gears in your head grinding themselves to pulp from my chair. He smiled. Ah, yes. That.